something in the water?
No, there's just something in the fucking water.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and Alien is back in theaters, and I could not be happier. It was scary, it was cinematic, and it paid homage to so many aspects of different Alien projects. So we're going to explain where Romulus fits in the timeline, how it relates to the prequels and the originals, as well as new lore and what it implies about the creation of the Xenomorph. Now, this is the 9th Alien film, so let's get the timeline sorted.
But wait, person, I thought it was a standalone film.
Well, it's a standalone film in the sense that you don't need to have seen any other Alien films for it to make sense, but it does take place in the same universe. Plus, director Fede Alvarez said something that specifies that it is completely canon to the universe, but we'll talk about that later. So this isn't a prequel or a sequel, it's an in-between-quel.
Rada?
They wanna wonga.
Well, it's set in 2142, 20 years after Alien, but 37 years before Aliens. It's not necessarily a sequel to Alien though, because it's not a follow-up to that story. In fact, during Romulus, Ripley is still just floating in that cryo chamber in space. Therefore, Romulus is an in-betweenquel. It's its own story set between two others. Also, for reference, the events of Prometheus are about 30 years before Alien and 50 years before Romulus. Okay, so now that we have our timeline sorted, let's talk about how Alien Romulus bridges a lot of the gaps between Prometheus, Covenant, and the original Ripley quadrilogy. Now, if you've seen Prometheus and Covenant, you know that their vibes are extremely different from the original film. Alien relies on the cramped, inescapable atmosphere of a spaceship, but Prometheus and Covenant spend comparatively little time in their respective ships. Instead, they swap out the cramped, sterile environment for these giant, lush landscapes of far-off planets. Prometheus and Covenant are also just way more philosophically inclined. Alien raises some great questions about corporate greed, ethics, and AI, but at its heart, it's a survival flick. Meanwhile, Prometheus is about who made us, why we're here, and if humanity is even worth saving. But the biggest difference in these movies is who they're focused on. Alien 1 through 4 with Ripley is focused on the working class. They may be on a spaceship, but they're eating gross food.
The first thing that I'm gonna do when I get back is to get some decent food.
And most of them are doing it all for the money.
Look, those two specimens are worth millions to the bioweapons division, right?
In Prometheus and in Covenant, everybody is relatively well off. Some are direct descendants of the Weylands, of the Weyland Corporation, such as Vickers and David. Others are highly educated scientists like Shaw. And of course, these are the people pondering these philosophical questions because they're the ones who have the time and the means to do so. Romulus, however, brings those two demographics together. The crew is very, very working class, like the crew from the Ripley quadrilogy. But when they steal from the Romulus ship, they are unwittingly thrusted into this very philosophical and scientific world that resembles the work we saw in Prometheus and in Covenant. Personally, I thought it was a great choice because both of these worlds exist at the same time. There are the miners who are indebted to the company and can't even leave their planet at the exact same time that Weyland-Yutani is spending trillions of dollars to play God and blow up rats. They aren't mutually exclusive on the timeline. Additionally, this film is an homage to both eras of Alien. For example, Kay's birth scene is basically an extended version of Shaw's abortion from Prometheus. And of course, Science Officer Rook is literally built from the same mold as Ash from the original movie. Rook even mentions the Prometheus project by name, stating that Peter Weyland gave his life for it. I mean, to have the face of the original android directly mention a prequel, what more can you ask for? And guys, I have to say, I love each of these movies from this franchise. The good, the bad, and the ugly. But one thing every Alien movie, especially Romulus, always does without fail is make me anxious. There are sequences in this movie that make my chest tight, no pun intended, and when I get anxious, I tend to do bad things like bite my lips. So I needed something to help distract myself from stressful situations and help me forget those bad oral fixation habits and replace them with a positive one. That's why I started using Fume. They're the sponsor of this video.
Oh, is that a vape?
It's not a vape, it's not electronic, and it doesn't have pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals. Instead, it has these plant-based cores that are infused with natural flavors to create natural flavored air. You see, flavored air is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. Fume contains no nicotine, it is not addictive, and it contains non-toxic flavors. It contains plant-based flavors like spearmint ice, cinnamon hearts, and my current favorite, orange vanilla. With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation habits through a passive diffusion system that does not use electronics, vapor, or combustion. But mostly I like that it still gives me something to reach for when I feel anxious, and it even has movable parts for fidgeting that make an incredibly satisfying sound. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be their next success story. For a limited time, you can use my code ScreenCrush to get your free topper. It's the perfect accessory to your Fume device. You slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. It's chewable for those who love to fidget, and it's reusable. So head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use the code ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen to get your free Fume topper when you order the Journey Pack today. Now, back to Alien.
Yeah, I'm confused. I thought it was the same android as in Aliens.
Nope, it's a different Rook. They're just made from the same cast. And we've actually seen this before. The Weyland-Yutani company actually reused David's design for their newer android, Walter.
I was designed to be more attentive and efficient than every previous model.
And it actually leads to a pretty kick-ass Fassbender on Fassbender fight in Alien Covenant. So synthetics have always been a bit tricky in the Alien universe. Namely, it's hard to tell if they're good or evil. The first synthetic we ever meet, in order of release of course, is Ash, and he's completely awful. He's the personified, or I guess robotified version of pure corporate greed. Lives are far less important than a potential moneymaker. In some ways, this is inevitable. It's built into the programming.
What was your special order?
Bring back life form. Priority 1. All other priorities rescinded.
But they're also not completely evil. It's established in Aliens when Lance Bishop saves Ripley and Newt.
I'll go. I mean, I'm the only one qualified to remote pilot the ship anyway.
And Andy's a good guy.
Yes, and I think it's because he's an older model that hasn't been updated. So the synthetics in the Alien universe are interesting because they've actually become less human as time progressed. David in early generation synthetics was too human.
You were too human, too idiosyncratic. Thinking for yourself.
David can also feel emotions, or at least he thinks he can feel emotions. It's kind of a murky distinction.
I loved her, of course. You know that's not possible.
And it's also implied that Walter, a newer generation synthetic, has emotions, but he's very resistant to the idea of having them.
Then why did you sacrifice your hand for her life? What is that if not love? Duty.
There are several times where it seems like Andy does have emotions. Embarrassment, fear, love, but when he gets the new module and the updated operating system, he becomes evil. My guess is that the older generation synthetics are actually capable of some type of emotion, like David claimed. But Weyland-Yutani is synthetically updating this emotion out of their synthetics to create greed-minded murder bots like Ash and Rook, who will do anything for the company.
But wasn't David like super evil?
He was, but he was evil in a remarkably human way. To put it simply, he had daddy issues.
Doesn't everyone want their parents dead?
He hated that he was treated as less than by humans, and he especially hated that his father projected love onto him while also maintaining that David could never reciprocate that love. He called David his son, but really he was just a tool. That's not a very no emotions robot reason to become evil. That's like half the supervillains we talk about here on the channel.
Low key. Same daddy, same issues.
Oh boy.
Plus, David fell in love with Shaw because she's nice to him.
I'd never known such kindness.
Again, that's a very human reaction. So Andy from Romulus appears to love Rain because she loves him and treats him with respect, furthering the idea that they can actually feel emotion. And if synthetics can feel emotions, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. That would mean that they're not inherently good or evil. They are truly just like humans. They are shaped by their experiences. So we also find out a lot more about the Weyland-Yutani company's true purpose. Now, in the original quadrilogy, Weyland-Yutani is basically just an evil megacorp with no thought beyond maximizing profit and colonization. And don't get me wrong, that's definitely a big part of who they are. But they also have a more philosophical driving force: immortality. You heard me right. Weyland-Yutani's real obsession is with creating immortal humans. There was a promotional TED Talk for Prometheus where Peter Weyland said,
"We can create cybernetic individuals who, in just a few short years, will be completely indistinguishable from us."
And he even calls humanity the new gods.
We are the gods now.
Synthetics were his first step in the quest for immortality. They never die, they never age, and he thought that they would be loyal forever. If you can't live forever, at least your companion will. And the entire reason he funds the Prometheus mission is so that he can live longer.
Save you from what?
Death, of course.
Playing into the themes of how even a trillionaire can't buy more time. And this movie confirms that Weyland-Yutani is still chasing that goal of immortality even after Weyland's death. And that rewrites some of the canon from the original film.
Yeah, didn't Ripley say they needed the Xenomorph for weapons?
She does in fact say that, but that's an assumption. She doesn't actually know because she's not in the science division. And again, that is a great way to merge the prequels with the original films. Weyland-Yutani still needs the Xenomorph genetic material, just like in the original film, but it's for reasons that align with the prequel movies. And hey, speaking of Xenomorphs and their genetic creation, be sure to check out our Abbey Road parody shirt, Ripley Road, featuring a design inspired by the evolution of these deep space demons. We also have this fun Dogs Playing Poker parody featuring parodies of our beloved aliens from across various classic sci-fi franchises. Shopping our merch store is the best way to support our channel so that we can keep making videos just like this one. Thank you so much for your support. Also, just a fun little nod to the original movies, the black goo extracted from the Xenomorph is actually used as a biological weapon, just not by humans. In Prometheus, there's this godlike alien race called the Engineers who had a ton of it at a military outpost. So now let's get into the question that we've all been waiting for. What's up with the Xenomorphs? First of all, I think the genetic labs beg the question, who created the Xenomorphs in the first place? In case you haven't seen Prometheus or Covenant, let me recap what we know from those films. In Prometheus, a scientific team discovers a black goo, probably the same black goo that we see in Romulus. One of the scientists, Holloway, is poisoned with the goo and he turns into a freaky monster, but before he does that, he has sex with his wife, Shaw. Shaw then gets pregnant, but she pulls a WandaVision and becomes 3 months pregnant in 10 hours. She aborts the alien and it then grows into this terrifying squid monster called a trilobite. Long story short, it facehuggers one of the engineers and from his chest pops a deacon, which is either a close relative of the Xenomorph or possibly its evolutionary predecessor. Then, in Alien Covenant, David's experiment with Shaw's dead body to create a whole bunch of weird aliens, including bloodbursters, neomorphs, and predomorphs. So basically, in all of the prequels, we see a lot of creatures that are really close to the Xenomorphs, but not quite Xenomorphs. And we don't really know how we get from point A to point B. There are theories that the engineers created them, and that's why the Nostromus crew found them in that ship. There are also theories that David created them through his experimentation. I mean, there has to be a reason that we see all of these Xenomorph-like creatures in the prequels, but never an actual Xenomorph. Hell, in Prometheus, there's even a mural of what looks like a Xenomorph, but not an actual Xenomorph. In all honesty, I don't think there were any on the planet LV-223 because they would have attacked the entire crew of the Prometheus ship, and that movie would have ended way earlier. LV-223, of course, being that original moon from the first film. It's possible that they existed at one point and then were extinct, or the engineers never brought them to LV-223 in the first place, but it seems super unlikely that they were inhabiting the planet of LV-223 while humans were there. Now, all of the Xenomorph-like creatures from the prequels were created through experimentation, and only 2 entities have experimented with aliens, David and the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. At the end of Alien Covenant, David boards a Weyland-Yutani ship with 2 facehugger embryos, and that happens in the year 2104. We also know the Covenant is a colonizer ship heading to terraform a new planet. Then, only 18 years later, the Nostromus finds a Xenomorph egg on a random moon. It's sketchy, especially now that we know that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation is playing with genetic experimentation. Also, Romulus opens by stating that Weyland-Yutani looked for the Nostromus for 17 years. That seems really excessive for an alien that might yield genetic experimentation results. It would make a lot more sense if they knew exactly what that alien was and if that's what drove them to find it. At the very least, I think the Weyland-Yutani Corporation knows some of what happened on the Prometheus journey. I mean, there is reference to the expedition in the movie, and again, it just makes more sense that they have some idea what a Xenomorph is if they invest that much time and money into looking for one. But maybe Romulus is not the first time Weyland-Yutani experimented on aliens. What if they've been experimenting with alien creatures ever since David landed on Origai 6? In the first Alien film, the eggs are found in a ship similar to the Engineer's ship, but in Prometheus, the Engineer's ship doesn't have eggs at all. So what if Weyland-Yutani fertilized those eggs themselves and it had to be in an engineer ship because of the black goo. Instead of risking their own lives by approaching their creation, they send an unsuspecting commercial spaceship to literally host their new creatures. That would explain why they're so obsessed with finding the Nostradamus and why they had so many facehuggers despite having apparently only one Xenomorph. And the seemingly serendipitous connection between the engineers in Prometheus and the engineer ship in Alien. Now, this was a standalone film, so it was never going to answer all of these questions, but for a standalone, it really brings in a lot of references from the prequels and the originals and opens up a really cool can of worms. Remember, it was produced by Ridley Scott himself, and Fede Alvarez pitched it directly to Ridley Scott. So I don't think any of these references are random. After all, there is another Alien project set for next year called Alien Earth, and it takes place around the same time as Prometheus. This could all be hinting at the history we'll see in that new show. Plus, Fede Alvarez said, quote, "I'm also a big fan of following the canon to the letter and not deviating too much from previous creations. With that in mind, I don't think Alvarez would do anything that could undermine future projects, especially since Ridley Scott was involved and would tell him if he was violating canon." Special shout out to Brianna McLarty, the writer of this video, and guys, let me know, did you like Alien Romulus? Did you like the connections to the prequels and the originals? Let us know down in the comments below, or you can at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, be sure to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.